That's not really fair. That music was so good. I think we could all just listen to that for the rest of the evening. I'm also Canadian, so we're everywhere. But we disagree sometimes, Canadians. And actually, I don't have a work-life balance, and I think that's okay. So that's something to maybe start with. I moved to the UK in 2004, and as a Canadian, when I got there, I was super excited, and I made my list of all the places I was going to go. Number 1, the Victorian sewers that run under London, which is not the same as everyone else would visit first. That was day 1. Day 2, I went to a waste transfer station. Day 3, I went to something called a MRF, which is basically a big factory that separates waste. And day 4, I went to my first landfill site. Why did I do these things? Because it was the first time in my life that I'd ever had any time, or I gave myself any time to explore the things I was really interested in. And I've always been fascinated by waste. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with it. I love it in that it's wonderful and beautiful and filled with opportunity. I hate it because we've just invented it over the course of the last 3 generations. It's not something we ever needed. It's not something our great-grandparents ever had. And it's what's drowning us. And if we look at our particular sector, or where I find myself, fashion, the stat that's just come out that is in all the newspapers and all across Google and Ecosia is that we have enough clothes in the world for the next 6 generations. We don't need any more. We have enough. But what we do need is the creativity to reuse that material and make it personal to ourselves and clothe ourselves and protect us from the weather. Why is there a pile of fire hose behind me? Because in all of my first tours of London, I saw a fire hose, and I thought, why is that? And on its way to landfill. And then I had a chance meeting with some people from the London Fire Brigade, and they let me know that in London every year, they produce between 3 and 10 tons of this material as waste. And that's for 2 reasons. Either fire hose reaches the end of its health and safety life, that's 25 years, or it gets too damaged to repair through use. And fire hose goes to landfill because there is no traditional way of recycling it. It is a double-wall nitrile rubber jacket surrounding a nylon woven core. You've got a Frankenfiber there. A lot of our clothing is also Frankenfibers. Whenever you mix a poly with a cotton, we have no way currently of separating that out. You've got something that will persist and that cannot be recycled and cannot be biodegraded. Fire hose is a material like that. So I thought, I'm going to take it home. The people at the London Fire Brigade thought I was crazy. But on that day, I said, look, I'm going to do 2 things. 1, I'm going to solve this problem. And 2, and this is why, although they thought I was crazy, they gave it to me. I said, if I ever do anything exciting with it, I'll give you half. And that's what happened. So essentially, I took one of these lovely hoses home. It's 18 kilos, so that's why I'm strong and tough. And I put it on the floor of a house share in Brixton. I was living with a bunch of friends at the time, including my partner, Elvis. And I said, this is what we're going to do. And Elvis looked at me and he said, you mean this is what you're going to do? We all have jobs. The reason why I had this also time on my hands is because I had just sold my first business. And my first business, I managed to sell it for a very, very, very small amount of money, despite it being a spectacular failure. I imported the first biodegradable packaging that was not polymer-based to the UK. The problem with it was it biodegraded on the way to the UK. So of the 2 things it was supposed to be, biodegradable and packaging, at least it was one of those things. But I sold that company for the intellectual property that underpinned it, for enough to live in London in a house share for a year, provided I ate beans on toast and used public transport. So that's why I had time to be in landfill sites. I'm not sure where to point this. I've been kind of watching everybody try and understand what the methodology is. There we go. And this was the product that we made that allowed us to upcycle fire hose. A lot of the recycling that you see in the world is downcycling. You take something of high value and you remove every step of the way a little bit of that value through time. And what upcycling is the reverse. We're taking something of no value and we're increasing the value dramatically. Why did I go into fashion? A couple of reasons. One was research. At first, I wanted to make roof tiles because most fire hose is this rich red color, and I thought, If it's fireproof and waterproof, it's going to make great roofs. Unfortunately, fire hose is neither fireproof nor waterproof if you leave it outside for 10 years. So if I hadn't done my research, I would have made a bunch of roofing tiles, and they all would have been leaky, and they all would have been flammable. So research is key. What I discovered through the research is that a very, very famous French brand that I'm sure everyone here has heard of, called Louis Vuitton, is there anyone here who has not heard of that brand? Uses precisely the same material in their collection. So a lot of that brown, leather-looking material with the gold LV logo on it is actually not leather at all. Since the dawn of complex polymers, they've been using nitrile rubber. Fire hose is a more expensive version of that raw material. So why is it going to landfill? And naively at the time, I thought it wouldn't be that hard to compete with a dead French luggage maker. I thought I could take down the whole industry overnight. I didn't even know about Armani, you know. So we thought we will make luxury goods. The first goods we made were belts like this. This is actually one of the first belts we ever made. We started in 2005, so this is a very old belt. The reason we made belts is because belts are long and straight, hose is long and straight, relatively straightforward. The capital investment required to set up the business was about 39 pounds. That was a rotary cutting tool that we used to cut the first fire hose. It's virtually impossible to cut. It's 4 mil thick of rubber. You try going at that with a pair of scissors and you'll end up with a claw. So we made belts to start. We didn't have enough capital to finance the growth of the business, but what we did, and this is pre-Kickstarter, so what I should have done was start Kickstarter. That's the lesson I learned in retrospect. But what we did was we went out with a first ever bag, and we showed 200 people who bought it in advance, and we used that money to finance our first production run beyond belts. And the company has never raised external capital, so we have been purely, entirely based on selling to customers. This bag that you see here took us about 5 years to make. It's quite complicated, but it's now our bestseller. And if you go to the Victoria Albert Museum in London, there's one in their permanent collection highlighted as the future of luxury. So in a way, we have beat Louis Vuitton. It just took us 20 years. But how did we beat Louis Vuitton? And I think that comes down to the superpower of the business, and really that's its generosity. When we talk about the circular economy, we're talking about a flow of materials in a circular environment, whether they be technical goods or biodegradable goods. But we never really talk about the circular flow of capital, and if we're going to reduce inequality, that's what we have to talk about. So for me, it was incredibly important to keep that first promise to the firefighters, which is why from the fire hose collection, 50% of the profits have always gone to the firefighters' charity. What I didn't know when we made that promise, and when we started and effectively built the business at the heart of this community, was that there were 66,000 firefighters in the UK, and they had friends, and they had families, and they have admirers all around the world, and that there's websites like uniformdating.com, because people want to date firefighters. So without really thinking of ourselves, without being selfish, just by being good, we gained this whole cohort of brand ambassadors that were desperate to tell our story and share it with the world, which is why it didn't take us very long to solve the fire hose problem. We started in 2005. By 2010, we had solved the fire hose problem for the UK. We collect all the hoses every year, fix them, sort them out. Now we're scrabbling around finding hoses in different countries from decommissioned oil rigs, things like that. So it's something that we were able to scale relatively quickly, but that's also because it's a niche waste. And when we got to 2010, that gave us our next challenge. Someone sent me a small bag of leather scraps. And I'm not talking about like an old pair of leather trousers. I'm talking about the fact that a cow hide is shaped like that. And the companies that use leather cut out the shapes that they want, and the rest falls to the cutting room floor. The vast majority of it is incinerated or landfilled. And it is to the tune of this kind of waste is 800,000 tons a year, 35,000 tons in Western Europe. A lot of it actually in Italy. Instead of designing a product at this point, because this is 2010, people were starting to talk about the circular economy more and more, we thought we would design a system so that all of this leather could be turned into new things, taken apart and remade again. So this is the kind of work that I do. Elvis, who's not here, the real genius, the work that he does is taking that idea and turning it into reality. The reality here was a Lego-like system that you could put things together and take apart. So you might not be excited about rugs, but this rug is exciting, because if you don't like it, or if you move to a smaller house, you can take it apart down the middle and have smaller rugs. If your dog eats the corner piece, the rug isn't dead. You just call me and I send you a new corner piece. If you don't actually want a carpet at all anymore, you can turn it into something else. You can turn it into a cube. Now that cube is not super interesting, except for it proved we could work in 3 dimensions. And that means that we could make things like chairs. We could upholster furniture. And if you don't like that upholstery anymore, that's fine, because you can take your chair apart and you can make a bag. And because we always promised to give 50% of our profits to charity, we did the same with the leather project. And the partner that we work with is Barefoot College International. So we work with them, we create scholarships for women to train as solar engineers. The interesting thing about Barefoot was that obviously fire hose firemen makes sense, right? Or firefighters, let's say. Let's be clear, there are female firefighters in the world. But the interesting thing about Barefoot is that it wasn't directly linked to leather. But we knew that for us, climate change was a really big deal, and cows are linked to climate change. So it was a bit more tenuous, but it was incredibly important to Elvis and I to be involved with. The partnership with Barefoot was really, really scaled massively because our first leather waste partner was Burberry. Burberry came to us because they produce about 9 tons of leather waste a month. And we've proven that 9 tons of leather in their world and at their margins is worth about £2 million a month. So that was the amount of revenue they were leaving on the floor. And it's why we've been able to do such exciting work with Barefoot. This is another problem that I've almost cracked. In the UK, we do not have a deposit system. I know, it's terrible. We don't have a national waste strategy. Shame. We have 16 million of these cans littered into our public spaces every year, which is a total tragedy. If you add that to the plastic drinks bottles that are littered every year, 32 million drinks containers. These collective drinks containers in our natural spaces are responsible for the deaths of 4 million creatures. An amazing study was done by a British environmental charity to show just how much death this kind of litter creates in our landscapes. And I thought, why is aluminium so underloved? Why is it not sexy to people? What can we do to make it sexier? So I thought I'll be able to find a 3D printing machine, put a can in the top, and get products out the other side. 3D metal printing, it exists, but it's incredibly expensive, and you have to put a refined metal powder in one end. So we thought, let's do it the Elvis and Kresse way. Let's do it without any energy whatsoever. Let's invent a solar-powered microforge. We did that with Queen Mary University over the course of the pandemic, and the major goal with them was to design a forge that could be built anywhere in the world for $500. Right now, this forge can be built for $700, so we're not quite at our goal, but it is open source technology. So we didn't design it ourselves, for ourselves. We designed it so that we could share it everywhere in the world that Coca-Cola is brilliant at taking its cans and rubbish at getting them back. This is effectively our business plan, pretty simple. The most 2 things here I think that might stand out is that we make our business decisions based on whether or not it's going to make the world better for other people's grandchildren. That's our shorthand for sustainability. It's kind of our North Star. 410 or 100,000 pounds. Money to me is WD-40. It's not particularly interesting, but it can be interesting to some people. If you put a ton of leather waste in the ground, it will cost you 410 pounds. That's the gate fee in the UK. If I turn it into my system and sell it, I generate 100,000 pounds with that same ton of leather. That's a better rate of return than you get if you're an alchemist. That's better than lead to gold. So what are we doing with all of the waste that we produce? We're just having a failure of creativity. I'm extremely proud to be a social enterprise. This is actually an incredibly intimidating audience for me to speak in front of because you're my heroes. This is my peer group. These are the only people in the world here today that I'm ever interested in impressing, so it's a lot for me to be here. Now, this is where we get to everything, everywhere, all at once. All of you are busy, but I'm going to ask you to do something more. The kind of people that are in this room are capable of more. When I was about 12 years old, my grandmother told me, if you're capable, you're responsible. Which is a lot for a 12-year-old, but I'm 47 now, so I can take it. I think what hit me was that I do make handbags, and they're the best handbags in the world, and they're the best handbags for the world. But we weren't doing enough for climate change and biodiversity loss. That's part of why we went and made the Solar Forge, but that still wasn't enough. When the pandemic hit, Elvis and I made a list of all the things we'd ever wanted to do, and we decided not to wait to do those things, but to put them into practice now. We wanted to do more for biodiversity loss. We wanted to do more for climate change. The only way we could figure to do that was to buy a farm. And we didn't buy a great farm. We bought the worst farm in England. The people who owned it before us sold a turf cutting business, which effectively meant that they sold the topsoil. So we bought a farm without soil. Pretty bad. We also bought a farm where there was 7 buildings. All of them were basically condemned. 2 of them had failed asbestos roofs. So it doesn't get much better than that. And the idea was, if we can bring this whole site back into abundance, then we've really shown what the potential of regenerative agriculture is, what the potential of focusing on soil first and biodiversity first can do. The plan we came up with for the farm, by the way, I'm not a farmer, no farming experience. My grandfather was a wheat farmer. It is not a skill you inherit. This was our initial plan for the farm. Because we had no soil, all the studies told us the only thing we could plant was grapes. Climate change also told us we could plant grapes, because England, it turns out, is the new Bordeaux. So the farm had no water. We made a plan for rainwater harvesting and for ponds. We made a plan for vines. We made a plan for planting trees. We made a plan for wildlife. We made a plan for biodiversity. We bought the farm in 2020, so we are 4 years into that plan. And it looks a lot different than that. This is my proudest moment in my life. Day 1 in the UK, I went to see the sewers that everybody celebrates because of their amazing Victorian architecture. Those sewers are terrible. All they do is take crap from one place to another, which is effectively still what we do with most of our sewage in the world. But there are better systems, and this is the system that we have built. We treat all of our own sewage on the farm, and this is what it looks like. We have our human manure becomes vermicast in a wormery, and all of our wastewater runs through a wetland system that we've constructed, and the water that comes out at the end in the final pond is bathing quality water that we've tested and is cleaner than our tap water. And it does all of this. Nature does all of this. There's no energy required. We also we incorporate sheep. We follow all the regenerative agriculture principles. We do cover cropping. We have 28 different species of plants per square meter. We grow mushrooms. Anyone wants to talk to me about mushrooms? I've got some great stories. Happy to share those with you later. And we built our own workshop to replace a failed building. We built not just any workshop, it's a 3 Little Pigs workshop, which means it's built out of straw, which is a carbon-blocking material, and a timber frame. By moving to this site and building this factory, which is 3 times larger than our last site, we have simultaneously reduced our power consumption by 94.7% through good design. We're not architects either, but research was what brought us to the design of this building. Our first visitors were obviously people from the fire service who came to admire what we did, but also to make sure that the straw was going to be fire safe. I think they were slightly nervous that we were going to be entirely flammable. We're not, because the straw is limed. It's one of the things you can do for a fire break. But I guess the message I want to leave you with is that although we're all busy, and most of the people here have taken on a lot more than your average citizen, I think we know what citizenship requires of us now. And I don't think any of us have to stay in a lane. We have to learn how to collaborate. We have to learn how to go into new spaces. We have to learn how to work together to scale, because the problems that we're facing are huge and existential, and they can lead to hopelessness. But action is, I guess, my cure for that. Hope comes from action. And I think a lot of us can do more if we work together. So I'm really looking forward to the next 3 days and to collaborating and working with as many of you as possible. Thank you very much.